Chapter 7, key issue 4, is about ethnic cleansing and genocide. And so we'll look at the process of ethnic cleansing and how it's and how countries or nationalities or ethnicities use it. We'll talk about ethnic cleansing in the Balkan region, and we'll look at the major episodes of genocide in northeastern Africa. And then we'll look at the episodes of genocide in Central Africa. So ethnic cleansing is a process by which a more powerful ethnic group forcibly removes a less powerful one in order to create an ethnically homogeneous region. So ethnic cleansing is when a more powerful ethnic group just, wants their entire area to be just one ethnicity, their own, and they work towards removing them. The motivation isn't just to defeat them or subjugate them or to rule over them. It means they want each member of the less powerful ethnicity, including women, men, children, you name it, elderly people, they want them all out. So ethnic cleansing can be accomplished through forced migration and deportation. And it can also be accomplished through genocide. So ethnic cleansing can be either forcing people to move out, or it could be, through extermination. So here you can see the forced migration of people throughout Europe during and before World War II. And so you can see people that were, these are settled by the International Refugee Organization in France, United Kingdom, from Germany. You can see people they moved out of Poland, moved out of part of Germany. And so you can see that World War II, because of ethnic cleansing that was practiced, resulted in a great deal of forced migration, both before, after, and after. Particularly as things like the USSR was being developed, as that was forming after World War II, it still led to more forced migration. And we know that in Germany, we had not just ethnic cleansing, but it was ethnic cleansing, not just removing Jewish people from Germany, but they wanted the extermination of Jewish people from the world completely. And that's when you move into genocide. Here you can just see a breakup of modern day Europe and the different countries and ethnic groups. And we'll be talking primarily about this region here and this region here. So in the Balkan region, ethnic cleansing occurred in the portions of the former Yugoslavia. So in Bosnia, Serbs and the Croats they did not want to be part of a multi-ethnic state with a Muslim plurality. So they didn't want more than one group of Muslims, and they didn't want to be multi-ethnic. So they conducted ethnic cleansing on Bosnian Muslims. They wanted to reduce their numbers, and they wanted to be an ethnically homogeneous group of people because they wanted to be candidates they wanted to join Serbia and Croatia. So within Bosnia, they wanted to get rid of any groups that would prevent them from joining. The ethnic cleansing of the Bosnian Muslims made one continuous area of Bosnian Serb domination rather than several smaller ones. So here we go. We've got Bosnia and Herzegovina. So the people who were Croatian in Bosnia wanted to belong to Croatia. People who were Serbian wanted to be part of Serbia. And then to do that, they wanted to get rid of the Bosnian Muslims. And so after the ethnic cleansing, you can see that here we have a larger number of Serbian people. So they thought they would be able to join Serbia and become part of just the Serbian nation. And then the same thing, the Croats wanted to join Croatia. So down here, you've got primarily Croatian people. Because it was so complex, and because it was so violent, when we talk about the term Balkanization, because the way in the Balkan region, in the former Yugoslavia, the violence that it took to break this area up, whenever you have any unified group that is breaking apart with conflict, we call that Balkanization. So for example, the fragmentation of our media, how there seems to be media that is sharply divided between left-wing and right-wing. That term we call that the Balkanization of the media. The fact that you can kind of pinpoint some news channels or some newspapers that are, or I guess even internet sites that are predominantly conservative and predominantly liberal. And then there's some that are still like decent and in the middle, but because there's so many that you know without watching it that it is going to be biased to a conservative standpoint, that would be called balkanization. And that came from all this ethnic conflict. So if you can't stabilize one area because it was inhabited by multiple long-standing ethnicities, we call it balkanization. And whatever peace is there in the Balkan regions, unfortunately, it's because it worked. They removed they removed most of the Bosnian Muslims, and so they got what they wanted. And so the peace that kind of ended up in the Balkan area, it ended up there because they were pretty efficient. I was in high school when this happened, and it wasn't spoken about much. I had friends that were a year or two older than me that, were in the Navy, and they were doing like peacekeeping in the Balkan region. And as peacekeepers, they weren't allowed to really intervene, and it was terrible. Ethnic cleansing and genocide in sub-Saharan Africa. Genocide is the mass killing of a group of people in an attempt to eliminate the entire group from existence. So in the Balkan region, they didn't necessarily want the Bosnian Muslims off the face of the earth. They just wanted them out of their country so they could be politically aligned with either Serbia or Croatia. In the case of genocide, you just want them off the planet. Like, you don't want them to live somewhere else peacefully. You want them dead. And so that's the difference. Genocide is really a type of ethnic cleansing that results in the mass extermination. Genocide is an international war crime, and so it's really difficult to get the UN to declare a genocide in a country because that requires really like international intervention. So some genocide that's happened in sub-Saharan Africa, Darfur. Darfur is part of Sudan. It's a small group of people in South Sudan. So in Darfur, we've got Black Africans, and they launched a rebellion in 2003 because they were experiencing a great deal of discrimination. The Sudanese government, which is primarily it's an Islamic government, they used the help of Arab nomads to crush the rebellion. So these Black Africans in the northern part of Sudan were experiencing discrimination. They wanted to stop, and they rebelled. 488,000 were killed, and over 2.8 million live in refugee camps still in super harsh conditions. Many countries across the world, although not the UN officially, have termed the actions of the Sudanese government as genocide because it was targeting the Black Africans in Sudan. These Black Africans in Sudan that are still living in these refugee camps because they're still there, or they're living in a refugee camp just outside of Sudan, or if they're in an IDP camp. Sudan is now facing drought-like conditions and a possible famine. South Sudan is experiencing famine right now. So people are not just being killed by war, but they are suffering from malnutrition. And it's still going on. It was something that people talked about a lot in the early 2000s, and it's kind of faded from memory. But it's not over. So it's important to know that Darfur people are still living in refugee camps, and people are still dying. Genocide that maybe is a bit more familiar to people would be the genocides in Central Africa, like the Rwandan genocide. So this genocide involved the Hutus murdering hundreds of thousands of Tutsis, and that began in 1994. The genocide in Rwanda really is a result of the colonial legacy in Europe. So when the Dutch came to Rwanda, they favored the Tutsis over the Hutus, and they were given more power. So when Rwanda gained its independence and the Tutsi held political power, the Hutu felt discriminated against, and they believed they deserved equal representation in the government, and they were still resentful from their treatment under the colonial powers. And so they shot down the president of Rwanda's plane, and almost overnight they overtook the country. Everyone had identity cards that identified which ethnic or tribal affiliation they had, were they Hutu or Tutsis, and they began murdering people by the hundreds of thousands In 1 month, 800,000 Tutsis were killed, including women, children. It's horrifying. The conflict between the Hutu and the Tutsis spilled into neighboring countries as well. So throughout the Congo, we had the conflict continuing. Today we've got ethnic conflict in Africa primarily because the boundaries of the countries don't match the boundaries of the different ethnic groups. So during the 19th and 20th centuries, European countries kind of broke apart the continent. They gave them colonies, and they didn't look at the different tribal affiliations, ethnic affiliations, or religious affiliations in the country. They just divided up the country. When these colonies became independent states with sovereignty, the tribes were divided sometimes among more than one modern state, and sometimes they were grouped with tribes that they had nothing in common with, or tribes they'd have conflict with for hundreds of years, which leads to generations of conflict occurring. And so if you look at in the map in your book, you might be able to see a little bit more clearly. You can see the boundaries of the independent countries in Africa. And then the smaller, lighter lines are the different ethnic groups. And so if you look at places like Ethiopia, Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia, Nigeria, all countries that have had major problems, Rwanda, you can see how many different ethnic groups were leaked inside one modern country. And those ethnic groups had no say in what would become that country. So Sudan, in Sudan, you've got the Darfur crisis happening, right, up in the north, and you've got refugee camps here. They had no say in what part of which country they would prefer to be in. The northern part of Sudan, and so this year until 2011, all of Sudan was one country. The northern part of Sudan was primarily Muslim. The southern part is primarily Christian. Within these groups are tons of different individual ethnicities. There was a large Sudanese civil war that was fought primarily between the Christian South Sudanese and the northern Muslim Sudanese. This led to, again, hundreds of thousands of Sudanese refugees, some which who came to the United States, some were in refugee camps in neighboring countries like Uganda and Kenya, and some were in internally displaced persons camps. When we did the VR goggles in class, you saw one of the South Sudan refugee camps or internally displaced people camps that were set up almost like in the swamplands of South Sudan. Today, South Sudan is its own country, but it's experiencing civil war right now between two ethnic groups within South Sudan. So the Dinka, who have the most power, and the other smaller ethnic groups that feel like they are being persecuted. If you look over here in Ethiopia has had a great deal of political strife as well, many civil wars. There was a war between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and the atrocities committed in Eritrea were horrifying. And so read in a little bit more detail about that in your book. And Somalia, which had a civil war as well, and the U.S. was there as peacekeepers. And we had, again, hundreds of thousands of Somali refugees spread throughout the world. This area, the Horn of Africa, is also frequently experiencing drought conditions, which can lead to famine. Usually drought alone doesn't lead to famine, at least not in today's world, but authoritarian governments kind of help that along. So not only is there sometimes not enough food, but there's unequal access to food. People don't have enough money to buy food, and they can't really do much to protest against it. So today, Somalia is currently undergoing famine conditions, as is South Sudan. Nigeria is nearing famine conditions, and Yemen up here. Ethiopia experiences cyclical famine conditions. And so all of these areas are also plagued by food shortages, authoritarian governments who might spend, millions of dollars in celebrations for themselves while people are starving to death in their homes. And so again, a lot of the conflict within sub-Saharan Africa can really be attributed to the lack of respect for different ethnic groups when we were establishing countries and the consequences that result from that. And so one of the colonial legacies that we left Africa was continued strife. And if you look through your book, we're just reading some more details. This, again, is a quick overview, and we'll discuss some more of this in class. But Just keep in mind that conflicts